Palmer, the question for me, as a Clemson fan, you see Pickens goes down. I mean, that's massive. We lost Justin Ross last year, and that was a slap in the head for us. Who do you really think, especially with the guy who came from LSU and just that guy you were talking about just a second ago? I forgot his name. Who do you really think is going to? Yeah, who do you think is going to really step up? And I mean, we've got a pretty good defense and be a good playmaker as far as in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned two of them there that have been banged up a little bit recently. Kyrus Jackson and Jermaine Burton, both of them are expected to be healthy for this game. The one I would really look at would be Adonai Mitchell. He's a true freshman. Stepped in that spring game just a week or two after Pickens suffered the injury. The timing of it was, you never want to see a player get hurt, but I guess if you're Georgia and you realize, hey, this guy's hurt and you need to find a replacement, you need guys to step up. Spring practice is kind of the ideal time, and early spring practice too, because you've got the rest of the 2-3 weeks of it to continue to develop your team. Adonai Mitchell is a guy that I would look to there. He immediately stepped into that X receiver role that George Pickens was playing, and had 7 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown in the G-Day scrimmage. Seems to have great chemistry with quarterback JT Daniels. We spoke with Daniels after the game about that, and he completely agreed that what made George Pickens so special was the ability to just trust him and throw the ball up and trust that he would come down with it. He said a 50-50 ball is more of an 80-20 with George. And he kind of felt the same way about Mitchell, that even in a short amount of time, those two guys built up great chemistry. And I think there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't have continued to build on that all summer and all fall camp. So he's certainly a guy that I would look towards to kind of step into that role. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint is another guy, bigger receiver, 4 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown last year. Got injured on that touchdown and missed the final half of the season. And so, he's coming off of an injury, but from videos that we've seen, he was working on the field. It was a lower leg ankle injury. He was working on the field this spring, and from videos that we've seen posted, he's been out there and active this fall. All great reports about Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint and his ability to kind of step in. So those are certainly two guys, along with Kyrus Jackson and Jermaine Burton. Those are certainly two guys that I would look to fill into that bigger receiver role and play, step in to fill the shoes of George Pickens.
Palmer, in regards to anything that we did not cover, I guess when you look at the ups and downs on this Georgia team in regards to strengths, and I'm not going to call them weaknesses. I don't think either team really has a weakness. They have units that aren't as great, that are just good versus great. And you match those up against what Clemson does really well. What gives you concern?
It's got to be the secondary. I mean, just looking at Georgia from the perspective of they've got so many things to replace there, and Clemson feeling confident in their receiving core, especially with Justin Ross returning. If he returns to the Justin Ross form that every college football fan knew and the defensive coordinators feared, that's a troublesome thought for Georgia. And ironically, you're probably going to see Darian Kendrick, former Clemson player, guarding Clemson's top player, and so that would be a great matchup to see a Kendrick and Ross battle. One that I'm sure that they had many a times in practice. I think so. That's where I would look as a big matchup. Another one that I would look at would be along when Georgia's on offense and they've got to go up against this incredible Clemson defensive line. I think any team should be concerned about going up against Clemson's defensive line. Regardless of whether it's the first game and you're replacing starters or you've got one of the strongest units in the country, I think Georgia can have one of the strongest units in the country. They've got the guys, they've got the talent to replace the guys that they're replacing. They're replacing Trey Hill at center. Well, like I said earlier, Cedric Van Pran appears to be the front runner there, and he's a former #1 ranked center in the country for his signing class. They're replacing Ben Cleveland at right guard, and potentially have the ability to put Justin Schaefer at right guard, someone who started 10 games last season, 9 at left guard and 1 at right guard, and Jamari Salyer at left guard instead of left tackle, someone who started 9 games at left tackle and 1 at left guard. That would be one great way to replace him. In that scenario, though, you're looking at that left tackle position potentially being a weakness, potentially being a question mark. And I don't think that's what you want going up against this Clemson defensive line. I know that's not what you want going up against this Clemson defensive line. So you're probably going to see Jamari Salyer at left tackle, a guy that has played the position that they feel confident in, that's been battle tested, whether it was against Alabama or, the Florida, the rest of the SEC schedule. Salyer at left tackle is probably Georgia's best bet there, which would mean Justin Schaefer plays left guard. Like I said, Van Pran probably at center, and then Tate Ratledge at right guard. A guy that has been, if Justin Schaefer plays right guard and Ratledge is not in the starting lineup, those two will be rotating. If Schaefer plays left guard and with Salyer at left tackle, Ratledge is going to be the right guard. And so, it's almost, he could be the sixth man. He could be one of the starting 5. And that kind of depends on, where Jamari Salyer falls. But Ratledge being the former, a top 3 offensive tackle in his signing class, has moved inside to guard and found, to be, a very strong threat there, for Georgia. I think he's another great guy. And then at right tackle, you feel very confident with what you've gotten. Warren McClendon started 9 games for them last season. The last 9, they were working that position out and really found an answer with McClendon, who ended up earning freshman All-American honors as a redshirt freshman last season. So I don't know that that's necessarily a concern for Georgia as much as it is an interesting matchup to watch because of what Clemson brings defensively. But there's really, if you're Georgia, there's no better way to prepare for that than going up against the defensive line that they are every day in practice. Because if Clemson's the number 1 defensive line in the country, I really do think that Georgia has the number 2. And I think this game is, you could potentially, depending on how those 2 units play, you could make a case for Georgia to potentially have the best defensive line in the country with what they bring back in Jordan Davis, with what they bring back in Devontae Wyatt. With the guys that are stepping into larger roles in Trayvon Walker and Jalen Carter, that top 4 is one of the best in the country. And like I said, it may not be the best because of what Clemson's got, but if you're gonna be tested week 1 against that Clemson defensive line, there's no better way to prepare for that than what Georgia's got going against them every day in practice.
Jason, when you look at Clemson and, again, those units that aren't quite as great as some of the other units, look at Georgia. Where's your concern?
We got to start up front with that offensive line, obviously. Vastly underperformed last year. I've said it over and over. And now you're having to replace your left tackle, Jordan McFadden. Sorry, I'm starting to lose my voice. Jordan McFadden's moving over from the right side to the left side. And he's a little shorter than your normal left tackles are, but he's got the length to make up for it. And I'm not concerned about him. I think he's going to be very good in that role. But then at left guard and center is where some of the questions come in. They got Matt Bockhorst at left guard, but you got to replace Cade Stewart at center. And the ideal situation would have been for Hunter Rayburn to be ready to take over that spot at center, but that's not the case. So Clemson's been having to let Bockhorst take snaps at center, and he, along with Mason Trotter, have been battling for that job throughout camp. That battle's gonna stretch on probably up into the game. But that's probably my biggest concern, the interior of that offensive line with Bockhorst, whoever plays center, and then Putnam, over on the right side at guard. I thought the interior of that offensive line just did not live up to expectations last year. They took their lumps. Hopefully they learned from it. And those guys have really – they came into the spring and they came into the fall, carried it over into the fall. They had a chip on their shoulder they heard all that talk. They talked about it multiple times in the spring. They heard it, and they want to prove that it was more. Last year was more of an anomaly. But like he was just saying about Georgia, their offensive line going against that defensive line every day in practice. Iron sharpens iron. There's no better way to practice for a matchup like this than going up against a defensive line, with that kind of talent. And that's what this offensive line at Clemson's doing too. It doesn't matter which one's the best defensive line. They're both one of the top defensive lines in the country. So those offensive lines, they're matching up against elite level guys each and every day, and that's only going to make them better. My second concern would be the secondary. So I'm echoing what he said about Georgia. I got the same concerns about Clemson. Last time we saw Clemson, that secondary was just did not look good. I think Clemson was real beat up on the back end of the defense last year, and it really affected the way they played. I think not having to, year in the weight room hurt some of those younger guys too. I thought some of those safeties looked undersized, and I think I've seen those guys in fall camp. They don't look like that this year. They just look different. They look like they've been in the weight room and putting in the work. And like guys like Landon Zanders and Joseph Charleston and R.J. Mickens, they just look better from a physical perspective. Now we have to see if that translates into their play on the field, because that safety core's got to be better than it was last year. Like Bobby was saying earlier, I'm not concerned about the corners. To me, it's more about the safeties. I think there's some questions to answer there. I think they got, the talent, but they got to prove it on the field. And I've really not seen that yet, not in a big game, not from this group that's currently on the roster now.
Now, Jason and Mark, let me ask y'all this. How do you think this game is going to play out in terms of, you've got the questions on the offensive line, guys that are being replaced, going up against an elite level defensive line both ways. So you feel like the front seven is probably going to control this game, stop the run, get after the quarterback. But then you've also got the questions in the secondary with some answers at wide receiver for both teams. Do you think this is one that's going to be high scoring, where teams are, both the teams are airing it out and putting up big points that way? Or do you think this could be a, slug it out kind of battle with the defensive line, front seven really dominating? Because I go back and forth. I think that there's a chance this could be a really low scoring game, and that those defensive lines and front sevens are dominating against the offensive lines, and that it's really hard to run the ball. I don't think either team's going to be able to run the ball all that well. And that, they're just making, it a nightmare for the quarterbacks? Or do you think that those offensive lines are going to be able to hold their own slightly, just enough to get those wide receivers and passing threats open downfield where, Georgia and Clemson are going to put up big points on the scoreboard?
Yeah, I'm like you. I kind of go back and forth. I can't really decide. If I had to pick right now, I lean more towards more of a lower scoring game. Like you said, the front sevens kind of dominate. Maybe might come down to which team's receivers can make one or two more plays out on the perimeter in space, make a guy in the secondary miss, break off a long run and score or whatever. And it could come down to special teams too, special teams in these low scoring games. If this is what this game is, special teams always seems to play a factor. And it could very well come down to a special teams play that decides this game. But if I had to sit here right now and make a prediction, I definitely lean more towards a lower scoring affair. I'm not saying 13-10 or anything like that, maybe in both teams in the 20s. But that's what I would say right here today, just because of how good the front sevens are on each side of the ball. I think both of those front sevens are going to wreak havoc in this game.
I can see us going to halftime in like a 17-14 game that was mostly defensive dominated, but because the rush isn't going to get there every play, and there is potential to break free and make big plays in the passing game, that there's going to be 3 to 5 big plays that are going to be near scoring plays, either scoring plays or 45-yard, 50-yard plays that are going to put somebody in scoring position, and you're going to see a bunch of 3 and outs. But when you see a play, you're going to see a play.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I don't necessarily see any long sustained drives.
Yep.
Where a team's going 3 yards in a cloud of dust against one of these front sevens. But I'm with you. I think that both these teams have the weapons on offense that they could and match up very well against the defense that they're going up against, that they could hit on some big plays, and that's going to be kind of the deciding factor in this one.
Very well. That would not surprise me one bit either, especially what I was just talking about with Clemson secondary and those safeties, tend to get caught peeking in that backfield sometimes, especially the way Georgia likes to run the ball. I could easily see Georgia hitting 2 or 3 big plays over the top of his defense, and that could be the difference in the game.
All right. Well, while we've taken down the path of how's this game going to play out, if it comes down to it, both kickers are very capable. They're not necessarily automatic, though. So, Palmer, I'll start with you. Jack,
Podlesny,
had the big kick against Cincinnati. That was a 53-yarder with all the pressure on him to either you win or lose. It was a 1-point game. At that point, of course, they got the safety. So at least he's done it in the clutch in a game in which everybody's watching him. And he pulled through.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about the special teams and kicking game, like Jason said, this one certainly could come down to, a big play in special teams. And whether it's, Georgia pinning them deep, and Jake Camarda, one of the best punters in the country, being able to put Clemson's offense in a position where they're uncomfortable, pinned up against their own goal line, or it's, like you said, Podlesny feeling comfortable hitting the big kick. Whether it's 50-something yarder, having to show the leg or something with the clock running down. I think Georgia feels very confident in their special teams and their capability to do that. I also think it's certainly going to be interesting to watch. The way that Georgia's kick return game works out this year. Kenny McIntosh was back there, Kyrus Jackson was back there some. And they both showed potential to maybe bust off a big one. Georgia hasn't done it in a while. I think I could be wrong here, but one of the last kick returns was against Clemson and Todd Gurley. So I feel confident that Georgia feels confident in their kick return game and their special teams in general. So I'd certainly think that's an area where the Bulldogs would feel very confident if it came down to that.
Yeah, Clemson's another team that doesn't have a lot of, big returns, have made a lot of big plays in the return game. The practices I was at this fall, I saw Lynn J. Dixon, the freshman Will Shipley, both working a lot at punt return. I expect Dixon, to work some at kick return. I've heard Justin Ross has been working some at punt return. I don't know how true that is. Somebody told me that. I didn't actually see that. But that tells me Clemson's trying to get a little bit better in the punt return game. We usually see a lot of fair catches, even if they got 10 or 15 yards running room. Maybe we see them be a little bit more aggressive this season. As far as kickers go, Clemson's got a 5th-year punter. He feels like he's been there for 10 years. Will Spires. He doesn't have the strongest leg, but, he's usually going to punt the ball to where you can't return it. You have to fair catch it. And that's always a good thing if you got good return guys. But Clemson's, field goal kicker, B.T. Potter, going into his senior season, he's probably got one of the strongest legs in the country. Hasn't been, consistently consistent. Got a lot better last year. But, he can kick them from a long ways, well over 50 yards. How confident you would be in that with 3 seconds to go, needing a 55-yarder to win it, I don't know. It's certainly not 100% because we haven't seen him do it consistently. But he's certainly got the ability to do it. Let's put it like that.
Good stuff with Palmer Toms from Dogs 247 Sports. Catch his work right there, covering Georgia football on a regular basis. Dogs 247 Sports, Palmer Toms, and Jason Priester always joins us to talk Clemson. Jason, we hope you're feeling better. You said you're losing your voice, so
Yeah, I've had a rough day today, man.
Oh man. Okay. Well, Jason doesn't have to talk anymore. You can catch his writing. He just has to hit the keyboard for allclemson.com on SI. Maybe we'll tap you for one other thing, Jason, maybe even two, but it doesn't have to be long. So, number one, I don't know if you guys are big on predictions. Well, you're going to have to be big on predictions because you're going to be giving me your predictions every week on Patreon. But besides that, I don't know if you're big on predictions. And if you definitely want to point everybody to your site for a particular article where you're going to leave the prediction, I don't want to squeeze the prediction out of you here if you want to point people to your picks. But I was just curious if you've thought about it, gotten it down to a number, or you're still debating, or where are you with that, Palmer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still kind of in that debating phase here, where, like we said, I feel like, each and every day, I kind of have a different feeling about this game, whether it's going to be a slugfest or a shootout, whether Georgia's going to come out on top or Clemson's going to come out on top. So it's certainly going to be interesting to follow. I think a lot of that, maybe my gut feeling is going to come down to how Georgia's injuries shake out and how they how healthy they are headed into the matchup. I know Vegas kind of has the number at Clemson -3, and I think that's probably a pretty good number there. I certainly would put Clemson as the favorite, but I don't think it's far from a guarantee that the Tigers are going to come out on top here.
Yeah, I could go either way. Sitting right here today, I really could. I could see either team winning a 3 to 7 point game as we sit here right now. I go back and forth on it all the time, and how Georgia is health wise will probably play a big role in how I feel once we get closer towards the end of next week. But sitting right here today, it's still a little too early to tell for me.
And one other thing, Palmer, is there any angle to this game, any player, anything we missed? We want to squeeze this dry. Georgia Clemson preview. We want to provide everybody with the ultimate preview, one stop. Besides, of course, reading all your articles and Jason, all his articles. You got to do that too. But in regards to anything we've missed here, and if there's not anything, I ask you this question all the time. I do want a player, whether that's just one total or one on each side of the ball, that to gravitate to, just that you're intrigued by, that could break out and make big plays, and maybe not necessarily the obvious choice.
Yeah, I'll go with Darian Kendrick here. Someone that both fan bases are going to be pretty familiar with. I think with the questions that Georgia has in the secondary and the answers that Kirby Smart would love for Kendrick to bring, he's got that veteran presence that Georgia needed. I've said all along, it's not a lack of talent, it's a lack of experience that Georgia has in the secondary, and especially at corner. And Kendrick has that big game experience. But last time out, it wasn't the best of showings for him against Ohio State, and that's certainly something that he's going to want to, shake off. And what better way for him, personally, to do that than against his former team and some of his, classmates and teammates and friends that he battled against every day. And so I think that's an obvious one to watch, whether it's, just because of the Georgia Clemson, the transfer dynamic there, but also I think he is certainly a big piece in replacing some of the lost production for Georgia in the secondary, which is going to be big in a game that potentially could turn into a shootout, could turn into a defensive battle, but certainly one where Georgia's secondary is going to be tested.
What do you say, Jason? Anything that we've missed here, or anybody you want to highlight?
I'll give you a guy from each side of the ball. On offense for Clemson, the obvious choice would be Justin Ross. So I'm gonna go with somebody else and say running back Lynn J. Dixon. He's been patiently waiting his turn behind Travis Etienne. This is his time. There's a ton of talent behind him. There's just not much experience. There's Kobe Pace, who's a sophomore, who's shown flashes as a freshman, but the coaches have raved about during the spring and the fall. Same goes for the freshman Will Shipley. Dabo Swinney called him the other day. He said the other day he's already one of the most respected guys in the locker room, and that says something to me. But to me, I'm curious to see if Dixon can finally leave his mark on it, start to make his mark on this offense in this game. Because during his first 3 years here, I have yet to see anything that convinces me that he is an every down back at a premier program. I think he runs too high. I think he's not very good at creating running room when there's a lack of running room. If the hole's not there, then he's in trouble. So I think that if he is not taking a big step forward in his development, we could see Kobe Pace starting to get more carries as the game goes along. And we're going to definitely see Will Shipley get some. It's just a question of how many and what kind of packages they got in there for him. But to me, Lynn J. Dixon's a guy, to watch on offense to see how it plays out for him. And on defense, I'm going to go with Xavier Thomas. We've been waiting 4 years for this guy to bust out and have that monster season everybody's been waiting on since he got to Clemson. He is down to 263, 265, something like that. He says he feels as good as he's ever felt. Brent Venables says he's looked as good as he's looked since he's been on campus. They have really talked him up all fall. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Thomas on the field, in peak shape, in peak physical shape, and seeing what he can do, and what he can finally do in this defense.